Welcome to the HR Think Tank, our podcast that uncovers the power a trusted workforce has on team performance, culture, and morale. We gather insights from experts, business leaders, and HR professionals to help you lead your team more effectively. Here's your host, Kai No, CEO of Verify Now, a trusted provider of background screening services.
A recent report from the Australian Government Productivity Commission showed mental health could cost the national economy up to $220 billion a year, which is just one more reason to care about how we can all support better mental health. Our guest today has vast experience leading teams, and in her latest role with insurance giant NIB is spearheading programs that are making a real difference to the well-being of staff and the wider community. Lauren Daniels has held senior roles in a long list of impactful companies including BHP, Deloitte, and Rio Tinto. She was recently promoted at NIB to the role of Group Chief People Officer, and we're absolutely thrilled to have her here with us today. Lauren, welcome.
Thank you, Kai. It's a real pleasure to be here today.
You've had some very senior roles in HR in your career, and I'd love to hear more about your leadership journey. I think on this podcast, we do like to hear the personal stories and how people got there and, some of the lessons and tips that you've learned along the way. So it would be great if you could tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are today.
Sure. Okay. I'm very happy to share a little bit about my leadership journey. Let's see. I began my professional career in 2001, working in various consulting roles in human resources. I'd probably describe myself as a natural people person in that I love connecting with people, love understanding what motivates and inspires people. So starting a career in HR seemed like an obvious choice for myself. I've been really fortunate in that I've worked for some amazing global companies throughout my career to date. And it was with Rio Tinto in London that I started my leadership journey when I worked in roles that were both indirectly and directly responsible for leading people. From an early age in my career, I was partnered with one of Rio Tinto's executives to help him transform his global function from a people perspective. And having that ability to directly shadow someone and watch a really accomplished and talented leader in action had a really profound impact on me in terms of what kind of leader I wanted to be and also what I wanted to be known for. So, working in the headquarters of a global business based in London, and, London literally is an international melting pot of a city, really allowed me to see diversity in action. So not only was I working with people from really different cultural backgrounds, but I was also working with people who had incredibly diverse experiences, thoughts, and ideas, and being able to see how this contributed to business performance was a really invaluable lesson in leadership that I think has shaped my own style and thinking today. I spent almost 4 years in London and came back to Australia to join Deloitte. I was really keen at the time to diversify and move outside of natural resources, and it felt like the right time to join a consulting firm to grow and expand my technical expertise in HR. However, it was not too long after joining Deloitte that I got a call from BHP, and they were setting up an office in Sydney to lead their energy coal business. And it was just too compelling of an opportunity to turn down. So I joined BHP, and I was really fortunate to work in a range of leadership roles. But I guess one of the ones that stands out in my mind was an opportunity to step into a head of HR position, which gave me a real taste for leading a function and how the people strategy and agenda can create and influence real meaningful enterprise value. After BHP, I took some time out to have children, and probably one of my favourite stories was being 38 weeks pregnant with my second daughter and landing a head of people and culture role with NIB. So as you can imagine, the interviewing process was quite interesting. But the fact that NIB was prepared to wait for someone before I started really meant a lot, and straight up talked to me about their culture and their contemporary way of looking at things. So as you mentioned earlier, Kai, recently I was promoted to the Group Chief People Officer role. And, in some ways I feel like I've come full circle to some extent with my leadership journey. I have the privilege to work with a really visionary CEO who is a natural people person. And I also have the wonderful opportunity to work with a bunch of talented peers in their own right in the executive team, which has me feeling really energized and inspired for the future.
Yep.
Yeah. So
yeah, because Laura, I'm really keen, to hear from you. What have been some of your key influences in your leadership approach? Because, you've worked across different jurisdictions. You said you've worked with some amazing executives, but I'd just like to hear if you've got any specific moments that you reflect on and go, oh, okay, that's been a key driver of how I do things now.
Yeah, I definitely think there was a pivotal experience when I was working in London for that executive, because I literally had the opportunity to work in partnership alongside that person and got across a broad range of business issues. So not just working specifically in the people function, I was working across his whole global division. So I got a taste of merger and acquisition activities, which I found really exciting and exhilarating. But what was really interesting about some of the things that I got involved in that were not so directly people related is that there's always a people bent. And I think if you have that HR background, it's really quite transferable and very universal in terms of its application. I was reflecting a lot on my leadership journey, and I was thinking about some of the leaders that I've worked with and how they've had an impact on me and why. And, I think it was their generosity of spirit, and that showed up in many different ways. It was the ways in which they entrusted me with opportunities to lead really important pieces of work, how some of these leaders invested and showed interest in my own growth and learning, and how they also taught me that it's okay to fail, because, through those failures.
That's hard.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's hard, really important to fail sometimes.
Yes.
And, the biggest piece is to pick yourself back up and, keep on moving forward. So, I think some of those experiences and some of those folk that I've worked with has really shaped me to be the leader that I am today. And it's really motivated me, Kai, to create similar experiences for the people I lead. So, ultimately the way I see it is that I have a role to play in sharing my knowledge and experience and some of my learnings so others can develop into this role that I'm in. Or maybe even a better way of describing it is actually saying that I think all leaders have an obligation to pay it forward. And I think by paying it forward, we have an obligation to nurture and grow our people to realize their full potential. And, I feel really fortunate in my career in that I've had plenty of those opportunities with so many fantastic, diverse leaders.
I think you've recapped that really well because having run this podcast now for 2 seasons, the common theme from the leaders that we've had on this show has always been about paying it forward, passing on the lessons, opening doors, creating pathways for others to succeed, compared to, some of the leaders that we hear about, but they're not sort of adored, is that fear. They lead by fear and they don't let anyone else succeed except them. So I think you've captured it really well. And I can see that just with the conversations that we've had with you, you're really warm and embracing.
Oh, thank
and
you.
The one thing that I did want to ask you about is the parenting front, right? The whole having a family, because myself, I started a family with my wife in 2019 too. And I get this question a bit, which is, has having your own family adapted or completely changed the way that you lead, the way that you see, people management, and just team management? So I want to throw that question to you because, you said to us, you interviewed or got this confirmation at 38 weeks with your role with NIB. So I'm really keen to see if that's had any influence, and if so, what has that influence been?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Absolutely, it has had an influence on me in terms of, what sort of person I am, but also, what kind of leader I am. I think naturally, when you sort of enter into parenthood, I think you understand what it's like to have a family, but when you experience it firsthand, you really do understand that it's, pulling people in all sorts of different directions. And, it's a very incredibly rewarding experience, but, it can sometimes be really challenging for some folk to find the balance between life at home and then also life at work. So for me, I think, how has that played out into my leadership style? I think, there's a lot of empathy. There's a lot of understanding, and there's a lot of flexibility. So, I appreciate that, it might not necessarily mean that someone needs to log in and start a day at 9 o'clock and finish at 5. You might do a morning shift if you like, and then you might take some time out and then come back on later and do your work. I think for me, it's more about, recognizing that you need to give people space and trust them, let them do their thing. And, if they've got the right skills and capabilities, they will flourish if you give them the right support and environment to be successful.
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks for that insight. And I have a whole bunch of other questions that I'll ask you another time, because we got you on the show today to not only talk about the initiatives that are taking place at NIB, but we also wanted to talk about some tips in terms of helping our people manage mental health, in their lives. So some of the most significant funding and program announcements from NIB over the last year or so have been around mental health initiatives. For example, you guys made a big donation of $750,000 to Lifeline Australia. And then internally, the implementation of the Life at NIB program, which was aimed at supporting the mental health and wellbeing of your 1,300 team members. So I've just got a few questions on this. My first one is, why does NIB have such a strong focus on supporting mental health in the wider community?
Good question. Look, our purpose is your better health and wellbeing. So this extends to our community partnerships, which are mostly funded by our charitable organisation called NIB Foundation. So by way of background, the NIB Foundation focuses on supporting initiatives which aim to better equip Australians, and in particular youth and young adults, with the tools, knowledge and resources they need to ultimately live healthier and happier lives. So it's part of both NIB and the NIB's Foundation's mission to empower Australians to be really proactive about their health and wellbeing, and ultimately prevent individuals from being able to develop chronic health conditions later on in life. Our $750,000 partnership with Lifeline focuses on prevention and postvention mental health support for Australians. So, I don't think it would come as any surprise to anyone, but in 2021, Lifeline experienced an unprecedented demand for crisis and mental health support, and they saw a significant increase in their use of online resources and services. And I think, we all saw this to some degree through our own lived experience through the pandemic. And we saw this as a really important opportunity to give something back to the communities that we operate within, given that this is a cause that we're really quite passionate about. Ultimately, Kai, we hope that our partnership will enable Lifeline to provide an online support toolkit for Australians to access self-help resources and tools that will allow individuals to take ownership of their own mental health journey and hopefully avoid reaching that crisis point.
One of the things that have come out of the pandemic over the last few years, and sadly we're still talking about it because there are still cases of it, there are still real life impacts of it, but one of the takeaways for me have been the increased conversations around mental health and the importance of it, and removing, I guess, some of the barriers that people had previously. And I found this not only at work, but I actually found this in my own personal life, that family and friends were more willing to talk about it. Everyone has a different way of dealing with it, right? Yeah. Some love to crack jokes about it, but deep down, they're saying that they're suffering, but their way of managing is through laughing. Others, manage in different ways, more outlet, more sport. taken up new careers. I don't know how many people took up baking over the pandemic, right? So we've all,
unfortunately,
yeah. So we've all got our own ways, but I think that's been one of the positive things to come out of the pandemic is this increased awareness about it, because for a period of time, and some still hold this view, but there's this stigma around talking about it and being weak if you talk about it. So I think that's been one of the big changes. And with more people taking up some of the services with Lifeline, obviously we would prefer not to have been in pandemic and lockdown, but with more people accessing the service, it's normalizing it. So it's not making only you go into that corner and you access it and that's it. Because in my background, I used to work with young people, youth at risk, and young offenders, young people who have been in jail. Yeah. And this was always, something that was a stigma. So, Lauren, I think it's wonderful that NIB is doing that, and I hope that support continues. I want to switch now to an internal focus, which is around the Life at NIB program. I'd love to understand the genesis of this program and what was the motivation for its implementation in your company.
Yes, so our shift to hybrid working first occurred at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. So naturally, our main focus at the time was protecting the health, safety and wellbeing of our people. So we shifted to full-time remote working, but initially as an experiment. However, it wasn't too far into our journey that we discovered that our people were really enjoying this way of working. And by, giving them freedom and choice in where and how they work, we saw that, our engagement results and our productivity results were increasing. So that actually prompted the thinking to actually formalize this hybrid way of working, which we affectionately call Life at NIB. So, it's this model's transitioned out of, quite a tough time in our history, if you think of the pandemic. So, from March 2020, this is where we sort of discovered this new way of working. And now that's really fully transitioned into a mature model, as we know it today.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I guess we're going to move into the part where we talk about the team impact, the employee experience, the learnings that you've had. So in a recent survey of NIB staff, 85% said that, this company supports my effort to balance my work and my personal life. 85% said that they felt they had the flexibility to meet both their work and personal needs. And then they answered, flexible work was the strongest recurring theme across the group for the question, what is the company doing well? So clearly, you've had some really positive take up of it. And I know you yourself are a big supporter of it. I think we're talking from your home right now, right? You're working from home at the moment. So you're clearly leading by example. So what have you seen as some of the positive impacts in terms of the work culture? And also when it comes to recruiting and retaining staff, what's been the impact of Life at NIB?
Look, we've had some really fantastic feedback on our new remote working approach and how it's helped to support our people in achieving better balance between home and work lives. We've had employees tell us how it's now so much more easier and accessible for them to be able to do school drop-offs and pickups, attend medical appointments, or even being able to participate in really important cultural rituals and events. So, in summary, I would say our remote working experience has been really incredibly positive to date and has had a positive impact on our culture. Reflecting on your point around attraction and retention, it's a good question. I think we've all heard about the Great Resignation and the war for talent, which involves many companies experiencing high turnover. However, for us, our turnover has remained relatively stable, and I think we can attribute that directly to our Life at NIB program. I think we recognise that people are looking for more than a traditional reward package these days. They're looking for an experience, and they're looking for an experience that they can tailor to their own personal circumstances. And this is something that we can genuinely offer. And then the other piece around attraction, Life at NIB for us has opened up our ability to be able to go and source talent from, different parts of the country and even outside of Australia. So, that's allowing us to ensure that we can attract the best talent, but also ensure that we're attracting our fair share of diverse talent as well.
Yeah, and with the recruitment piece, we've offered recruitment services for some of our clients as well, and we've had a whole host of candidates like not even consider a role if hybrid or, for some, remote work was not on the agenda. Like they just straight out said, nope, I won't even consider you.
Absolutely.
Have you found that to be the same?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, for us, we're in a really fortunate position in that people are saying what has attracted me to NIB is the fact that you have this amazing model. And it's, a model that actually gives, the individual some empowerment to be able to say, well, I think I could work it this way. Now, provided that that works within the legislation, it's safe and it meets our business requirements, we're really, really flexible around that. So, it's an amazing draw card for us. It's a real asset.
And is this a shift that you see is a long-term shift for NIB? And I'd love to hear your comments because you've got considerable experience in this space. You've seen how work has changed and you worked at some really large companies. So I'll firstly just comment around NIB. Is this a long-term shift? And then if you could dare speculate with me what you think the long-term impacts for, I guess, all employers could possibly be.
Yeah, so let's start with NIB. I think absolutely this is a long-term permanent shift for us. We recognise that to stand up this type of working, we've actually had to change the physical footprints of some of the offices or hubs, as we call them, to make it more conducive to flexible and hybrid working. So we're moving more from that sort of traditional office environment to more sort of collaborative style workplaces. So, we've made some pretty bold and permanent moves in rationalising some of our real estate to be able to facilitate that type of experience in office. One of the other things that I would say with our Life at NIB program, Kai, is that this was born out of our people's feedback. This was something that our people told us that they really enjoyed and they loved and they valued. And I think that this program will continue to evolve based on our people's feedback and their experience. So provided that it's still working for them and we're not seeing an impact on our business, I absolutely think it is here to stay. In respect to other organisations and what they're doing, I ultimately think that there's going to be a push as there's organisations. I mean, you said it yourself from a recruitment perspective. People are just saying, well, if you don't have that flexibility, you're probably not on my shortlist because there's so many other folk out there that are offering this. So ultimately, I sort of think that people are faced with a choice, and the choice is either to stick with that traditional way of working and offer some sort of level of flexibility, or be actually really bold and lead the race and sort of move to the future way of working, which I think is, absolutely what we're doing today.
And I think what we've seen over the last few years due to the shortages, the closed borders, etc., is a shift in the balance of power. And so people want flexibility, and people have had the power because they've had the options to say no to the ones that don't offer the flexibility. And then I think that's, in a way, that's forced some employers to rethink their stance on office only approach. I know in our conversations with clients and people within our network, for various reasons, they actually can't offer it. But for the majority of roles, there can be some sense of flexibility. Even if it's 1 or 2 days a week, there is an ability to do it. So it's just fascinating in 2022, I guess, having this conversation, if there are any employers, particularly if they're digital first, to say that they can't offer flexible arrangements.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point that you make. I think before the pandemic, if you think about our core business, we have a lot of frontline operational folk that work in a contact centre. And, if you think of traditional contact centre environments, it's, really noisy, buzzy spaces. You've got lots of people that are working alongside each other, talking to our members, providing them with support and guidance. And, I think it was hard for some folk to think that we were moving away from that type of environment because that's all they ever knew and that's all that they were very comfortable with. But, I think it's important to challenge and experiment. And, the pandemic actually really allowed for us to take that leap of faith and experiment, because in some ways we really didn't have that choice. So, I think for us, it's wonderful that we've actually cemented that this is part of our long-term strategy and our vision.
Yeah, that's excellent. With this great amount of flexibility, what sort of challenges have you faced in also ensuring that team members are continuing to perform at the level that is expected of them? So the question really is, how do you think flexibility has affected performance management and productivity?
Yeah, look, I think it's natural to assume that you would start to see a change and perhaps even see a dip in performance and outcomes when you move to a significantly different way of working, particularly a way of working that is still relatively new, as we've talked about, Kai, when you compare it to traditional ways of working that have evolved over the late 20th and 21st centuries. But for us, if we reflect on FY22, we've had one of our most successful years to date. We've seen really strong results across both financial and non-financial metrics, but particularly in the people metrics. We've seen some increases in our engagement scores as well as in our inclusion and wellbeing dimensions. And we've also seen some improvements in our overall safety metrics, which we look at, such as LTIFR. So, I think it would be easy. It's probably easy to think that, because we're not seeing people, they're not visible in an office environment, that, potentially it would be more difficult to manage performance and outcomes. But our results are actually suggesting otherwise. I think it's important to call out that leaders play a really important role in pulling this all together. They're very much responsible for role modeling and setting the standard to define what is expected of our people. Because, as I mentioned before, life at NIB is focused on output, not hours. We recommend that we recommend that 80% of your time should be done remotely and that there's about 20% time in hub. But we empower our people to actually make that decision as to, what does their working pattern look like based on their business requirements and also based on their personal life requirements as well. So we're not mandating anything to say that, hey, you need to be here in a hub at least one day a week. It's really up to our individuals and our leaders to work out what works best for them. And, if it's something isn't working, our leaders and our people need to meet each other at the same level and define a new way of working and looking at experimenting and changing things up. I think it's also important to recognise that, this new model requires different skills and capabilities from our leaders to stand this up. So we've been quite purposeful in developing, a whole newly revised employee development curriculum that includes bespoke leadership development programs and initiatives that are targeted at different levels of leadership. We also have a mentoring program in place that provides all of our leaders with greater opportunities to consider how do they build their knowledge, skills and experience and capabilities to support productivity and engagement in a hybrid working environment.
Yeah. Feels like for NIB specifically, you guys have had a really strong focus on people, and this program has allowed, I guess, the whole of the business to really reconsider how we manage people, how we manage output, what the expectations are. So in terms of the adjustments that you've made, we've had 2.5 years now to adjust, but just reflecting on some of the changes that have occurred, have there been any operational pressures that have prevented NIB from meeting customer expectations? And what has been the impact on customer experience?
Yeah, so like I said before, FY22 was a really fantastic year for us. Pleased to say that there's been no detrimental impacts in any of our financial and our non-financial metrics. And, by non-financial metrics, we also include metrics that measure the customer experience.
Mm. Okay. And so you haven't had too many complaints of people saying, where are the people? We're not getting the same service that we were getting before.
No, because a lot of our service and our support has actually always been over the telephone.
Yeah.
So folk, we're calling into our contact centre, so they're still very much able to do that. The only difference is that, I might be answering from the comfort of my own home versus, being in a hub or an office type of environment. And then we also have a whole suite of digital channels as well that our customers and our members can interact and engage with to be able to get further guidance and support on, different services and products that we offer.
That's really positive. And I think, like you said, the results speak for themselves, the financial and non-financials, I think have given you strong support or strong encouragement to say, yep, what we're doing works and let's keep doing it. So I just want to touch on the last thing around the flexibility. And I think even though you're encouraging 80%, work from home and 20%. I love that you guys have that flexibility because it's not a one size fits all. I know early on in the pandemic, a number of employees were trying to mandate like some sort of strict ratio, 3-2 or 2-3. And I had a number of people say to me, I don't like this. I'm going to look for a new role. Like, how do we go from this flexibility and the results were there, the productivity was there? What was the justification for bringing back to 3-2? And there was quite a bit of uproar, actually, if you read the media as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It is a good thing, but I will also say that I am a proponent or a supporter of hubs or office situations because we do need that connection, which is I guess the topic that I'd like to talk to you about now, which is the social impact between our team members. So with the greater flexibility and more team members working from home, some companies have found it a challenge to maintain, incidental social contact for their staff, so-called water cooler chat, which can be beneficial not only to the mental health, but to workplace collaboration, because you do get those opportunities to get to know each other just a little bit more, and it's when your brain relaxes a little bit more that new ideas sort of come out. So is this a factor that was considered when developing Life at NIB program?
Yes, absolutely. It's fair to say that our Life at NIB program is ever changing as we learn from our employees what's working for them and what isn't. And, we're really deliberate in going out there and getting that feedback from our people, whether or not it's through more formalized channels such as our, employee engagement surveys, or whether or not it's just through, that employee leader relationship where we're getting that sort of sense of how things are working for people. We absolutely appreciate that there is a really important social aspect of work and coming together. And that's something that a lot of us still crave. That's part of the reason why we've sort of set that sort of 80-20 principle out for people to define, well, how does that work for you and how does that work for your team? So, we've got a lot of teams. So I'll use my team as an example. We tend to come into the office every fortnight for a catch up. Now, some people might not be able to make it in that fortnight, but it's really important just to protect that time and know that, well, if I don't catch up with, Carly or Cass that fortnight, I'll get them in another meeting. So, for us, that was a really important consideration, that we were being quite deliberate and purposeful in bringing people together and giving them some really good reasons to be able to come together.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I'd love to talk more about the strategies that you've used at NIB to address this challenge, because I'm having these conversations with people all the time, right? Even now, we've got a remote team across multiple states, and trying to get everyone together is quite challenging just because of the distance. But getting people within those cities is a lot more doable for us. But even my wife yesterday, who works for Sydney University, she attended an event. It was, I think it was an awards night. We're releasing this podcast late anyway, so I think I can say it. But she received an award, and she said it was really nice to see people. And I think she said there was about 100 people there. So it created a place for this gathering. It created an experience. It wasn't just to show up to work and then to go into your own offices and then not talk to each other. Yeah. Because when those things happen, it's sort of like, well, we should have just stayed at home anyway. We're literally doing the same thing. Whereas I think some of the employees in our network are conscious, are being deliberate about cultivating some sort of experience when people are coming into the office, whether it's a morning tea, whether it's an awards, whether it's training, but not making it like a mundane experience, because it doesn't happen as often now. So I'd like to hear a little bit more from you, Lauren. What some other strategies that you've considered and have put in place to create, I guess, more of a social interaction, more social impact, and I call it social capital within the workplace. So I'd love, over to you.
Yeah, look, I think it's really important to note, Kai, that there's a number of strategies that, certainly that we've deployed, but I would imagine that there's a number of strategies that organisations would need to look at, because there's no single solution. It's the sum of all parts that contribute to tackling social connection in a remote working environment. And a lot of the strategies that we've deployed have probably been trialled and tested by us experimenting as to whether or not they're, effective, and, some of which haven't been effective, and some have been really fantastic, and some we're still evolving and still tweaking with. So, I think the biggest thing that folk need to come to terms with when you're operating in a hybrid environment is that creating real connections, it takes time and it takes effort. You're no longer putting people in an office or putting them in a cafe or in some sort of social setting, hoping that they'll cross paths in the hall. You will need to be really quite intentional about bringing people together and having them, connect, and, getting them to connect for a purpose is a really great start. I think for us, we have used technology to help bridge that gap when people are working remotely. We use a lot of social enterprise tools such as Workplace and Zoom. That's, been able to allow for us to be able to provide our people with some, wonderful access to training and, different initiatives and support programs, particularly if you're thinking about wellbeing and mental health. We've been able to tap people into various initiatives that work really well remotely, but none of this will ever replace the importance of coming together face to face. So the types of things that we come together for in person is for team strategy days, team meetings, as I mentioned previously, just general team catch-ups, or events or celebrations. So, recently we had about 600 people come from all parts of Australia to Newcastle to celebrate NIB's 70th year anniversary. And it was so special because it was such a milestone moment to celebrate, but it was also really special because everybody really appreciates and values the time when they come together to connect socially. So, I think if you weren't deliberate and purposeful about facilitating some of these interactions, you potentially could fail in not being able to create a really safe and prosperous environment for your employees. It's a really important piece to consider. Well,
congratulations on that as well, and getting everyone together. I wonder where everyone stayed. Like the hotels, motels would have been happy, having NIB chuck a huge party up
It was an interesting logistical challenge for some members of my team, that's for sure.
And so, Lauren, we've been talking about mental health. Early on, we talked about some of the support that NIB is providing. I just want to touch on mental health and, I guess, what the impacts of remote work have been, particularly for people with young children as well, such as you and I. So I'd like to talk a little bit about this, and I guess if you've got any observations or comments you'd like to make around it. Some people have found it really tough because they are used to that, constant social interaction. In our first podcast for season 2, we actually spoke to the CEO of Relationships New South Wales around the increased, loneliness, and I guess the lack of connectedness when people have worked remote from home. And I know you've talked about creating some of these events and all that, but I just would like your take on mental health support at NIB, and just generally what your view is on that, particularly because people are working more from home.
Yeah, so it's a priority for us. That would definitely be something that I would say first and foremost, that ensuring our people, it gets back to our purpose really, Kai. Our purpose is to ensure your better health and wellbeing. So that's for our members and our travellers, but it's also for our employees as well. And we recognise that we've needed to put a number of supports in place to really facilitate that experience for our people. So I can share some of those things for you to give a bit of colour as to what that looks like. We've put some really specific training in place around health, safety and wellbeing, some of which used to be delivered in person but now is actually being delivered remotely. And what's really interesting about that is that we've actually found that some people have had some really positive experiences and been able to access remote training, as mental health can be quite a personal thing. So being able to access some of these programs on your own terms has been a really positive experience for some of our people. I think through the pandemic, we learnt lots of lessons. So we had a lot of employees that were in Sydney and in Melbourne who were experiencing really long durations of lockdown. So we recognised that we needed to step in and create some really interesting and engaging campaigns to assist them through that time. And, one of the campaigns that comes to mind that we put in place was Lockdown Love. And that, basically talk to a series of different things that people could access, such as conversations with our mental health first aiders, interactions or training sessions with our employee assistance program provider on mental health resilience. We gave people free wellness hours of leave. So, we don't know, we didn't need to know what you were doing, but we wanted you to take out an hour for yourself out of your day to do something that made you feel good about yourself. So it could have been reading, it could have been meditation or exercise in the home. There were lots of digital gratitude cards that we circulated around. And, there was also some really great things that our people pulled together off their own bat, where they started creating community groups on workplace, such as Pride at NIB and Culture at NIB, where people were able to share some of their own experiences and insights and some of their learnings as to how they were sort of working through the experience for them.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That was really helpful to go through. And, I was meaning to ask you that earlier, but I didn't want to lose that opportunity, because I think what you've talked about and what we've read about with the changes that NIB have made have been really positive. And I guess part of our show is to take some of the practical things, some of the lessons, some of the failures, and to share that with our audience. So then they can go, okay, well, I'm considering doing that. I might give that a trial. Okay, I might avoid that. That probably didn't work so well for Lauren. So, I'll try that at another time.
Yeah. Another really practical tip that's worth mentioning, and one that's really easy for other people to, quickly implement, is that we pulled together a program where basically it's called Coffee with Our CEO initiative. So it's a monthly catch up with our CEO, where all of our new starters get the opportunity to meet our CEO in the virtual environment, ask him casual questions, get to understand what's front of mind for him and, what he's looking to do from a strategy point of view. And it's also an opportunity for him to learn about some of these new folk coming in and, what sort of roles they're taking on at NIB and, just the impact of something so simple has been really incredible. So there's another practical tip that
that's a great one
to implement.
Yeah. Just opens up doors and, it allows, I guess, the leadership team to have a pulse on what's going on as well and meeting some of the new talent that's coming on board. Lauren, it's been awesome having a chat with you and learning so many wonderful things that are happening at NIB. Before we wrap up, we like to do the Fast Five. This is where we ask you 5 quick questions about you so we get to know you a little bit better. Are you ready for this?
Go for it.
What was your first job and why did you get it?
Okay, it always makes me giggle, but my first job was working at a golf course in the Hunter Valley, driving a golf cart around, selling drinks and snacks to golfers. So from there, I graduated to restaurants, but I look back at my hospitality days with fondness as I had so much fun and I met some really wonderful people that I'm still friends with today. As to why did I get the job? Look, I was a student, so I needed to live, but I think they saw that I was a very social person and I enjoy a good chat. But look, I have to say, Kai, I don't know whether or not the golfers would have appreciated the social aspects of my personality. So that was my first job.
I'm sure they would have. What's something interesting that's not on your CV?
Look, we've talked a little bit about it throughout this discussion, but I run a busy household. I'm a mum of 2 young daughters, and we have 2 English stuffies, one of which joined our household a couple of days ago. And talking about Wellbeing, I have a goal where I try and do 10,000 steps every day. So, if I can get to 10,000 steps and I've got a smartwatch to track my progress, I feel like I've achieved something from a health and wellbeing perspective.
That is good motivation. I know it's raining here in Sydney, but saying that, I'm going to get out after. I'm going to get out and walk so I can meet some of those steps as well.
Do it if you can.
What have you learned about leadership and working on a team that you would want to teach your younger self?
Look, I think from a leadership point of view, you need to make people feel like they can be themselves. And I think you can do that by creating a warm and trusting environment where people feel included and they feel like they can belong. When people feel at ease, they are most likely to perform at their best. What would I say to my younger self? I'd say lean in, enjoy the moments that you are presented with and know that time and experience is a teacher in itself and that everything almost always works itself out. Don't sweat the small stuff.
Good advice. Provide a highlight from working in a trusted team.
Yeah, so when you find a team that you trust and you feel empowered to be able to do your thing, it just feels right. It's not hard, it's fun, and it can be incredibly exhilarating and rewarding. To be a part of a team that are working towards a common goal and seeing what you can achieve as a collective is something that's really special. I consider myself to be really fortunate in that I've seen this many times in my career. But I'd have to say, I'm really proud to say that I see this time and time again in NIB, not just within the people and culture team, but across all parts of our business, people coming together, working in trusted teams.
What would you like your legacy to be?
That's a hard question, Kai. Look, I don't see it as my legacy per se, but more about how can I play a role in harnessing the collective talents of a really highly engaged and, a high-performing team to achieve really great things. So I guess this is getting back to my piece around being able to pay it forward and play my role in that. And I guess, you might ask the question around what are some of those really great things that you'd like to achieve. And I think, to me, they're pretty simple and straightforward in that, some of the things that I see myself and my team doing is being able to create a really unique experience that makes people want to join and ultimately stay with NIB.
Lauren, thank you so much for your time today and joining us from Newcastle. It's been an absolute delight having you on the show, learning more about NIB and I guess the approach that you guys are taking with remote working. I think you're absolutely on the right track and you're going to get loads of good talent, I think, because of your approach. And yeah, I can't thank you enough for your time today.
Oh, thanks, Kai. As I said earlier, it's a real pleasure. I've really enjoyed the chat.
Today's guest was Lauren Daniels, Group Chief People Officer at NIB, one of the fastest growing health insurers in Australia, trusted by over 1.7 million people. We got insights into the challenges and opportunities of revolutionising the workplace model for a team of over 1,300 people and how NIB has shaped this new way of working to create better wellbeing outcomes for their people. You can learn more about NIB on its website, which is linked in the show notes. And of course, we would encourage you to follow Lauren Daniels on LinkedIn.
Thanks for listening to the HR Think Tank with Kai No. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share our podcast with your network. Check out the show notes for any resources mentioned in today's episode or visit the Verify Now website for more information.